Hi everyone. So today's professional development is going to be focused around homelessness in the K to 12 setting and how that's going to affect our students. So a lot of people may think, how does homelessness with students and their families, how is that going to affect us as counselors? Well, I'll tell you. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is just homelessness in general. So we're going to talk about the challenges that the homeless population face. And then next, we're going to examine the different laws that are put in place that are going to try to protect our homeless population in schools. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the different interventions that us as counselors, as well as teachers, administrators, and other school staff can implement in order to help these homeless students. Well, first, let's define homelessness. So, many people may think homelessness is simply someone that lives on the street in a box or something that you see in the movies. But according to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Assistance Improvements Act of 2001, that defines our homeless students as students who are sharing the residence of others due to the loss of housing or economic hardship. So that means that, sure, these students could be living on the side of the road, but they could also be living in campgrounds, they could be living in motels and hotels, which at my internship, that's the biggest thing that we see are students and their family, either brothers and sisters, parents, grandparents, living in motels, as well as trailer parks, emergency housing, cars, trains or bus stations, or abandoned buildings. So those are the most common that you're going to see. You may see at your internship sites other things that, other places where these students are living, or once you get a job, you may see those as well. So a little bit on U.S. Homelessness, a little bit of facts for you. According to the census in 2012, 634,000 approximately people were homeless in the United States in 2012. We've also been through a little bit more of an economic hardship in the United States, so that number may have increased. It also may have decreased in 2015. And out of that 634,000, 239,000 were homeless families of the 634,000. And then during the 2011 and 2012 school year, we had approximately 1,066,000 homeless children that were known to us and that had been reported. This does not include the students who may be using an aunt's address um, to put on their documents for school, but they may not be living with their aunt. So that's something to keep in mind. And a big issue that we need to be aware of as counselors is that the increase in homelessness throughout the years, especially after the 2008 recession, we have many social justice concerns that we need to face. We are advocates in our school, and we need to be the people to take that step to work with our students and minimize the stigma associated with homelessness. That they're dirty, that they're uneducated. As we notice, a huge amount of our homeless population are veterans, are military veterans, who have received advanced training and unfortunately just can't find a job. You're also seeing some people who may have been doctors, lawyers. Um, they may have been working in retail. You can make a lot of money in retail, in sales. And after that recession plummeted, they lost all their money, especially maybe in the stock market once that crashed. So it's important to keep in mind that there's going to be a stigma, but we need to work with our students, we need to work with our school and our community to try and reduce that stigma so we can provide them with the help that they need. Um, Another social justice issue is the educational access. So homeless families are also considered highly mobile. So our highly mobile families may not have the best access to good schools, especially those students who have disabilities. In addition to being homeless, they may need a certain program in a school that the
school you may have to pay extra for. And unless they are part of a home district, which I'll get into a little bit later, um, they may not have access to the programs that they really need to be successful. And then last is self-advocacy. So we need to teach these students to advocate for themselves as well, because we're not always going to be there for them as counselors. Of course, we're always going to be there for our students, but what happens when they get older and eventually they're out of school and living on their own and come across homelessness again? So another big issue in schools, and this is directly related to our students again, homelessness has been positively correlated in research with lower reading and math scores, as well as lower grades, higher dropout rates, higher grade retention, so being held back in a grade, higher rates of HIV and AIDS in our students, higher rates of substance abuse, and lower self-esteem. And all of these things is when these students, the homeless students, are compared to the housed peers. So these are rates that are being compared to students who live in a stable home and do not move around a lot. So now we're going to get a little bit into the laws that are protecting our homeless students and families, or that are trying to protect our homeless students and families. Um, so as I mentioned earlier, the McKinney Homeless Assistance Act, this was actually the one before it got revised in 2001, so this is from 1987. Um, there was a woman, last name Richards, I'm not going to disclose anything more, and her child were homeless. Okay, they were definitely, they go towards that definition of homelessness. So I believe they were jumping from house to house with relatives. They were actually denied entry into their school, into the home school where they were staying, due to a lack of proof of a permanent residence. So proof of a permanent residence would be a lease on an apartment, or a deed or a mortgage for your house, your license stating that this is your permanent address. When you move from place to place, you don't have those things. So if you're staying with your grandmother, or you're staying with your sister, or your mom, as in like an older woman staying with her mom, and so her child would be staying with her grandmother, that still technically defines you as homeless, because you do not have a residence. So the woman and her child brought this to court, and the judge ruled that because the mother tried to remain in one residence as long as she could in that school district, the district could not deny the student entry. So they could not turn that child and the mother away. And that's something we see a lot. So a lack of the stability and continuity, so keeping one student in one school throughout their education, throughout the year, it causes significant problems for our homeless students. So the purpose of this law and this act was to provide that stability. So we want to keep the students in one school, because the more we move them around, they're not going to pick up certain ideas and certain concepts that the teachers are teaching in class. So, and as I mentioned previously, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Assistance Improvements Act of 2001 was the amendment to that law, and it has been classified as part of the No Child Left Behind Act. So working to keep students continuing throughout education and keeping them in the school, so that way they're learning what they need to learn. So the McKinney Law also provides students with school supplies, it's supposed to, fee waivers, and transportation. Transportation is going to be a big issue when we're in schools working with our homeless population. So we could have a student that is living in Tinton Falls, but yet they need to go to Asbury, and as long as Asbury is their home district, Asbury should be paying to have a bus pick the student up from Tinton Falls and drive them to Asbury to get to their school, again, to maintain that stability. However, the law lacks the specificity that it needs to actually enforce these laws. So the funding for the school may not provide every homeless student with school supplies. So that would be pencils, pens, book bags,
notebooks in order to take notes, anything like that. And so in order to combat that, we've been putting liaisons into the schools to enforce the law. However, you put liaisons into a poverty-stricken school that lacks that funding again, like I said, to provide the resources, and what are you left with? You're left with liaisons that can't work for their students. And that's what we're seeing a lot in these lower SES schools. So we also have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so the IDEA Act of 2004. That, obviously, as it says in the name, is providing for students with disabilities. So we're working a little bit harder because these students have disabilities. You know, we think that they can't help it. It's a genetic thing. They have a disability. We need to help them because they can't help themselves. Homelessness, people think, well, you're just being lazy. You're not going out and getting a job. These are things we need to combat because just as you can be homeless, you can have a disability. And then as we mentioned, you know, the IDEA Act, that provides with students with disabilities and their families. So if you're homeless and you have a disability, you're more apt to get that funding, get that assistance that you need. However, not all homeless students have a disability. You can have very smart general education students who are simply missing school because they can't get there because they don't have the transportation. So then their grades are going to slip. Then you're going to notice that, you know, they're not considered to be that smart because they're getting bad grades, but in reality, they're just not getting to school like they need to because some schools aren't enforcing this law. Now we're going to move on to interventions. So as counselors, we know the problem. You are all now aware of the problem of homelessness. So now we need to combat it. And some interventions that I have seen when doing my research, as well as things that I've come up with on my own, as well as things I've seen at my internship, state that we need to first educate our parents, especially the homeless parents, and the school staff on these laws. These are laws. We need to follow them. And we need to do so, we need to educate them because these laws are requiring certain resources to be provided to the students and the families, and we're not providing that. So we are breaking laws by not providing these students with uniforms, with school supplies, with the transportation to and from school. And those are things that if we don't want to get in trouble as a school district, you know, we need to tell our school staff that. And we need to educate the parents on the laws so that way they can take the initiative as well. And they can work with us and we can push and we can advocate for them in the school to make sure they get that funding. Next, we need to educate the students and families. Again, it branches off that first point on the definition of homelessness. A lot of people may be doubled up with other families. So like I said, living with aunts and uncles, living with a friend and her kids, or living somewhere else with another family member or a random family who you met on the side of the road. You know, just because you may be living with someone in an apartment or you may be living in a home with someone, if it's not their residence, so if it's not that parent's home and that student's home and it's not their permanent address, they are considered homeless. So we need to educate students and families on realizing that they may be homeless. And it's okay that they're homeless right now, but we're going to work with them to make sure that they can get out of that and that we can find them a permanent address. Okay? Again, branching off even that, all of this is connected. So we know that this group is marginalized. We know that they're a vulnerable population. And we need to take it upon ourselves to work with our vulnerable populations. So that's our students that are, you know, suffering from suicide, our disability students, our mental illness students. And this population is marginalized. We need to remember that. They are suffering from poverty. They're suffering from homelessness and a lack of resources. So we need to take that social justice framework in counseling and we need to advocate for the vulnerable group. That may mean doing classroom lessons for the students, you know, educate them, let them know what resources we have to give them so that way they can be successful. And we also encourage self-disclosure to build the rapport. So this is now getting into the interventions that we can use in our counseling sessions with the students. It's encouraged to use self-disclosure a little bit, not too much, but that's just to build up the rapport as a normal counseling skill. So when we don't self-disclose anything and we don't try and make that personal connection, it can cause more negative consequences. And we all know that from our beginning intro to counseling class. Um, Self-disclosure, it can be nice with these homeless students. It makes them feel like a person. It makes them feel safe in the school and like someone's really looking out for them because they may not have anyone looking out for them at home. And we also need to enroll students even without the proper documentation to get them into school and to have that stability. I know people may think, that isn't that illegal? Why we have to have the proper documentation? A lot of schools lately have, if you have some documentation that you're staying somewhere, that will at least get them in, and it will qualify them for the homelessness initiative to provide them with the resources. So, if we don't necessarily have the proper documentation right away, we still need to take that student. We still need to try and provide them with the proper education that they have the right to. So that's, again, keeping stability. How are we going to do that? We're going to find them the transportation to get them to their school of origin, like I said with the Tinton Falls and Asbury example. And rather than the school closest to where they're staying, that's important. We need to keep the stability by not necessarily sending that student that they're staying in Tinton Falls, so we need to send them to a Tinton Falls school. But they spent half the year in Asbury, so how are we going to rip them from Asbury and throw them in a Tinton Falls school? That's disrupting the child's life, and we want to minimize that disruption as much as possible. We don't want to cause the instability, and we don't want to cause them academic difficulties. Then we want to provide the parent support, right? So by providing that student with transportation and helping them with the enrollment process, we reduce the stress on the parent. And that's crucial. We hear so much in counseling of stressed parents who end up beating their student, or they end up leaving their student, abandoning the kid. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep the family together as much as possible. We want to provide that parent, that family with the support that they really need. So that way they're not getting stressed out and they're not taking it out on their coworkers at that new job, or not taking it out on the kid. And then we need to be supportive with discipline. This is huge. We notice way too much students in schools who are homeless, and because of excessive absences and tardiness, they're getting held back in a grade, or they're getting detention, or now they're getting suspended because they're tardy too much in school. We can't do that. This is a student who is trying their best to wake up in the morning. They're trying their best just to get to school, and it may take them an hour on a bus to get to school. So of course they're going to be late. So we need to be flexible with them. We need to find out before disciplining them, is this a homeless student? Is this someone who has something really serious going on at home? Because it's all connected, and we know that as counselors, everything is connected. So we just have to be supportive, find different ways to discipline. So, we got to keep the discipline continuity throughout the school, but we need to do so in a differentiated way for each student, because we don't know what their home life is, especially in a low SES school. You're going to have a lot of these kids who are dealing with some rough stuff. So we need to just be aware of that. And then try and increase the safety, because these students, like mentioned previously, they're going to be tardy, they're going to be absent, and then it's going to take them a really long time to get home now. Now they have to walk a little bit further. So we need to put school resource officers or extra police officers or crossing guards along that trail home to protect all of our students. I mean, we see it close to the school. You see a lot of crossing guards, but we need to add a little bit more farther away. So that way when they're walking home, they're not scared of the stranger that's going to come and talk to them. Or, God forbid something happens and they hurt themselves and no one's around to help them. So we need to be aware of that as well. So just in summary, in counseling, when we're working with these homeless students, we need to express empathy with them, right? They're going through a really hard time right now, and we need to be empathetic of that, empathetic with them. And we need to avoid argumentation when working with the kids. They're going to be stressed. They're going to get agitated. You're going to get agitated as a teacher and as an administrator with this kid who now has 40 absences, or who has, and yes, I've seen that, unfortunately, or who has, 40 tardies. And we just need to avoid taking it out on them because it's not their fault. And then we need to support their self-efficacy. We need to build them up rather than break them down. So that goes back to getting rid of that stigma associated with homelessness. Got to help the student feel good about themselves in school and out of school. And when we're managing cases, because we know we're going to be caseworkers for a lot of these students, we need to reduce their consumption of alcohol and other drugs. So mentioned very early on, these students are going to be stressed. A lot of stressed out students turn to drugs and alcohol to calm them down, right? To deal with that anxiety, to deal with that depression. And we need to be aware of that these students are turning towards these substances, and put in the proper interventions to help them not go there, to prevent that, right? And we need to, again, increase their level of residential stability. So we need to try and help them find a place where they can be, stay put for a while, build a home somewhere, and enhance their economic and employment status. So connecting them with the right community resources to help them find a job. So that may be help them find a career counselor, or even give them post job listings around the school, especially in a high school. We have some students who are 16 and able to work. So post some jobs around the town, so this person's looking for a babysitter, or this family in town needs help at their bakery, something like that. It'll help the students get a little bit of money, reduce the stress, and last, be an advocate for the students. They need us. They need us to help them, and that's what we are there to do. We're there to help them and encourage them, and make sure that they can be the best student and the best person that they can be. So keep all of this in mind when you see something about a homeless student. Be aware of the struggles that they are facing, because it's going to be a trickle-down effect. Okay, so you're going to notice that I did give you a little map here, or a little diagram of just how the process can go when someone's homeless. So I'll just go over that quickly before we are all done here. So, a lot of times homelessness begins with the loss of income. Then, because of the loss of income, they're now losing their house. Now they're living with family members. Now their family member, can't feed them anymore, or they can't afford to house them, or they get in trouble with their landlord. So now the family has to move out and go to a shelter. Then, after moving into a shelter, we have some options. You're either finding permanent housing, which is very rare to go from living in a shelter to finding permanent housing. It's way too expensive. Or they're bumping from shelter to shelter. That is very common. So, this shelter fills up, now you have to move out because you've been there too long. So now you're going to move on to another shelter. Or you go from the shelter back living with another family member or a friend. And then, unfortunately, this happens way too often, especially in bigger cities. You're now, you haven't found permanent housing, didn't find another shelter that has openings. You have no family and friends around you to sleep, stay over their house. So now you're living on the streets. It's not the happiest of professional developments, but thank you for listening. Keep everything in mind and have a wonderful day, and be an advocate.